Hello everyone, Josh MC2000 here, and today I've got a video for you all on Ghost Rider Trail of Tears. This is a Ghost Rider book from the early 2000s, and it's written by Garth Ennis. Now, I know it's been a while since I've covered some Marvel on this channel, so you know what, I'm going to treat you all. I've recently been binging a lot of Ghost Rider, and while I pluck up the courage to edit that Suicide Squad video, let's get into talking some Ghost Rider, shall we? Now, Trail of Tears is... it's referenced in some of the later Ghost Rider books, but I don't think it's kind of like... it's not really like... it's not majorly going to affect anything, so if you haven't read this one, it's okay. You don't need it to understand the continuity or anything. But it's a nice little piece that's been done by Garth Ennis. Garth Ennis is a good writer, you know. I think what he's brought to Ghost Rider has been pretty good. And to my knowledge, he has done two Ghost Rider books, which is Ghost Rider Road to Damnation and Ghost Rider Trail of Tears. Now, Trail of Tears was done earlier. It was kind of like, I don't know, I think like early 2000s, kind of around the same sort of time as Marvel Knights Ghost Rider. Whereas Ghost Rider Road to Damnation was part of the increasing popularity the character endured during the time of the movie. For those of you that don't know, there was a lot of Ghost Rider stuff around 2007. You had the main Daniel Way comic book run that was going on, and you also had a couple of other series going on at Marvel that were Ghost Rider related, one of which being Garth Ennis' Road to Damnation. You also had the film and the game at the time, which, you know, it was kind of like, and also in addition to that, they also published an issue which was the ending of the 90s Ghost Rider run that ended on a cliffhanger. So, you know, there was a lot of Ghost Rider stuff coming out around that time. So, how does this fare then? As far as I'm aware, this is one of the first Ghost Rider things Garth Ennis has written. I could be wrong, and if I'm mistaken, please point me to what else he's written for the character, because to be honest, you know, more Ghost Rider is always a good thing. Now, let's start. Trail of Tears is set in the Old West, kind of in the aftermath of the American Civil War. There are two main characters that it follows, and the first being is I believe he's part of the South Army, I'm not too sure. He's a soldier that was involved in the Civil War, gets injured in one of the battles, and is pulled out by a scavenger. This scavenger being an ex-slave that has earned his freedom through work and brought land, you know, like, so, you know, he owns this farm and he runs this farm, and instead of fighting in the war, this deserter, but he was trying to desert in the process when he got injured. I think he got hit by something like a cannon or something, I'm not too sure. That opening scene set during the war is just utter chaos. And it's actually drawn quite well as well. The artwork in this book's really... well, it's a short issue, like 6-issue mini-series, and the art in all of it is really good. I really like how all of it looks. Now, so basically he gets taken in by this gentleman and his family, and he helps him around the farm, and, you know, he kind of says to him, you know, the war's over, what are you going to do now? It's been years at this point. And he kind of says, well, you know, I'm probably going to head out west and, you know, look to get a place of my own, start something out there. So, you know, they're part as friends, and they go their separate ways. But before they part ways, he finds this shrine in the forest, which is like skulls and stuff. It's kind of like, definitely leans into the more creepy side of Ghost Rider, because this is something like, I like a lot of superhero properties that delve into like the supernatural, you know. I love Constantine. Sandman technically counts. Like, I mean, it's a Vertigo property, but I wouldn't really call it a superhero-y thing. Partial to a bit of Spawn. You know, I guess even Red Hood and the Crow technically kind of count. So, you know, I do kind of like these characters that have kind of like a supernatural / mystical element to them. And it kind of leans more into that with this version of Ghost Rider. He's definitely a bit more creepier than some of the more later iterations. And it has some of my favourite artwork because it's very grungy, it feels kind of gritty, and I love this like early 2000s Ghost Rider where, like, you know, a lot of it is kind of like very grungy, very gritty art, because, you know, it's trying to go for a more darker tone. You know, it doesn't look like it's not very bright colours, you know, it's not like, it doesn't look like a Saturday morning cartoon. It looks more like kind of like a you know, it looks more kind of, I'm trying to think of the word. Not grim, it looks more, I don't know. It kind of, I don't know, it looks kind of gothic in places, which fits quite well with like the Wild West, you know. It kind of reminds me of Dark Watch in some senses, the way stuff's drawn. If any of you guys remember that old PS2 game. Kind of like a very kind of heavily stylized Wild West. And okay, so basically, I'm going to stop beating about the bush and get into the meat of this. This story does tackle some sensitive topics because it's based around the American Civil War, and a large part to do with that is to do with like slavery going on in the country at the time and other political issues. And basically the main antagonists for this story are a group of new frontiermen, Wild West guys, you know, like kind of like standard, think your standard group of bad guys in an Old West film. It's kind of like them, but they're ex-soldiers from the war, and they don't particularly like very much that this gentleman has paid for this land. And, you know, it's kind of like very early, like, you know, that I'm pretty sure one of the images of them has one of them wearing, like, white masks, you know, like, very early, extreme groups. So yeah, basically the villains for these, and the villain for this series is a group of, basically a Wild West gang that lynched this slave, or this former slave. And basically that's how he becomes the Ghost Rider, because, you know, he swears with his dying breath, I will find you and I will make you pay for what you did to my family. And, you know, he makes a deal, as a lot of Ghost Riders do, and the story passes a comment on the idea of the cycle of violence, which is quite interesting, because vengeance is kind of always a thing that's in the background in Ghost Rider. It's the core motivation for the actual spirit that makes up the Ghost Rider, but there's never actually really been a Ghost Rider story, to my knowledge, other than this one. Well, out of all the ones I've read, this is the only one that kind of says, hang on, wait a minute. So, let me get this straight. You want revenge, right? You do realise that can only lead to bad shit, right? And basically, there's a really... I'm going to talk more about the rest of it in detail, but the ending of it has this really brilliant moment where you have the Ghost Rider and his old friend talking to each other, and he's judging him. He's saying, like, you know, oh, how could you make a deal to do this to yourself? This witchcraft, this is evil. Like, you know. And he just stands there and he says, you are stood there judging me when you set out to do exactly the same thing I did. What makes me and you any different? Yeah, and the guy's got no response. He's just stood there like, well, And the idea is that, you know, these two people both set out for revenge, because when this new frontierman, this ex-soldier, finds out what this gang of men have done to him, He's like, okay, right, I'm not going to let that stand. I'm going to go sort this guy out. Because, you know, he was my friend, he treated me well. I'd be dead if it wasn't for him. I'm going to go repay that debt. So he goes on his way, hunts them down. And, like, you know, he takes out a couple of them. But the Ghost Rider also takes out several members of this gang. And it's pretty gnarly what he does to them, to be honest. Garth gets very creative, and there's some Punisher level stuff in here. For instance, one of the gang members, he ties to 4 horses, 1 horse tied to each limb, and then he just stands there in the Ghost Rider form. He just stands there, and then as soon as one of the other gang members takes a shot, the horses bolt. And the poor sod does not end up in a good state. So yeah, so basically, I'd say till about the 3rd or 4th issue, it is concentrated on the Ghost Rider and this other gentleman hunting down this gang that have wronged them. Well, wronged the Ghost Rider, or the person who has become the Ghost Rider. The thing is, I understand why the one character's like going out there for revenge, because it's like, he's my friend, I will avenge my friend's death. It's like, obviously his natural thought isn't, oh, he's gonna come up out the ground and do it himself, you know. So, and it definitely, in the segments where he's the Ghost Rider and he's hunting these guys, it definitely leans into like the supernatural side of it, and it makes the Ghost Rider come across as kind of scary, you know, like he's this guy on a horse that's on fire that they're firing shots and shots and shots into, and he just keeps riding. And it's like, you know, they just say, okay, we can't kill it, our best hope is to just outrun it, just keep riding, keep riding, keep riding, don't let it catch us. But eventually they have to stop and rest, and every single time they stop and rest, it catches up with them, because he doesn't stop, he doesn't tire. And there's an awesome bit where he's talking to the guy, you know, the bit that I told you about before. He actually describes to him what it was like the first time he came back as the Ghost Rider. You know, like he says, I came back in a body of my own, I couldn't close my eyes were constantly open. Like, and he describes what the power felt like. And I just really love Trail of Tears. I think it handles very sensitive topics really well. Because, like, you know, I'm British, okay? So, like, the American Civil War doesn't really, like, I don't know that much about it, but I do know it's something that can be quite a touchy subject over in the States. And I respect Garth for taking a subject matter that, one, he might not know much about, because Garth is also part of the British invasion, he's not American. So one, he's took a very touchy subject and is managed to make a really interesting story about it that, like, you know, I wouldn't say it makes you think all that much, because, you know, the bad guys in it are very clearly the bad guys, you know, they might as well just have giant neon signs that say scumbag above them. You know, you know, there's no ambiguity between who's in the right and who's in the wrong. It's not criticising the idea that these people needed to be stopped, because they are. Towards the end of the story, they make a deal themselves, and they come back as spirits. You know, not as Ghost Riders, but they come back as kind of like these monsters. And, you know, so it's not about, oh, do you stop them or not, because they're clearly scumbags, they're clearly monsters. You know, they're the kind of people, characters like Clint Eastwood, the man we know name, kills dime a dozen. You know, like, you're not going to shed a tear for these guys when they get done in by the Ghost Rider. But what it does question is, it turns around and says, you know, at what cost? Because it's basically, you know, the entire town gets leveled, and loads of innocent people get hurt in the process. like, because of the vendetta these guys gain for the Ghost Rider. But, you know, they go to this town, they go to multiple towns and just kill everybody there in an attempt to lure out the Ghost Rider, because they want their revenge. So, you know, it kind of, as I said, it comments on the idea of the cycle of violence. And, you know, it's kind of like that old expression, an eye for an eye makes the world blind, and I think the Wild West is a very good setting for that as well. Because, well, I just love the Wild West. It's a really good setting. I have copious amount of cowboy movies, and I love Wild West-based games, so yeah, the Ghost Rider comic set in the Wild West, that it's kind of like somebody took some of my interests and literally just says, let's make a comic out of this. But yeah, as I've said, it deals with some very touchy subjects as I said, it deals with some very touchy subjects in a very good way, and, like, you know, it's a really good story, and I'd definitely say if you can get your hands on the single issues, read it, because it's... I looked at the trade paper, and the trade paper is not easy to come by these days. Unfortunately, it's one of these things that hasn't got reprinted, so it's going to be a bit of a pain to get your hands on, but if you can, I would highly recommend it. I looked upon them because I was in a second-hand comic book store and found them there for fairly cheap and in fairly good nick as well. So I must admit, I got quite lucky finding those ones. But, you know, I do go out of my way to pick up a lot of Ghost Rider, you know, like Ghost Rider is a character I really like, and I would like to get to a point where I've read everything, well, at least his mainline series, and I think I'm slowly getting there, because I think, with the exception of Robbie Reyes' stuff and Fear Within, I think it's called, you know, the one where the female Ghost Rider makes her first appearance. I can't remember her name. I always forget her name. It's I'm not gonna make myself look like an idiot trying to force it out because I can't remember it. But like, she's barely been used. I think she's in like 2 stories. Fear Itself. Oh yeah, Fear Itself. That's what it was called. Fear Itself. 2011. Fears Itself. I need to get Fears Itself, the Robbie Reyes run, and then I need to finish collecting the 90s stuff, and then read that. And I think then, with the exception of like the original series, which I think for me is probably going to have to be a trade job, because they are slowly releasing that in trade. But I think hopefully someday I will reach a point where I've read everything, at least the main Ghost Rider series anyway. And, like, you know, Ghost Rider is a character that I'm willing to do that with, because it is the character that got me into comic books originally. Anyway guys, I feel like I've rambled on enough with this one. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope I piqued your interest into looking into a fairly obscure Ghost Rider comic, because I'm going to be honest, when I brought this one, I thought I was buying Road to Damnation. I didn't realise Ennis had wrote 2 Ghost Rider comics in this kind of time frame. And I must admit, I hope what I've described of the plot piques your interest. Anyway, that's it for today guys, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.